Shaquille O'Neal speaks about faith, forgiveness, and the true meaning of success. Are you ready to hear one of the most profound conversations about life, purpose, and what really matters? Today, you're going to witness Shaquille O'Neal open his heart about faith, forgiveness, and how his understanding of success has evolved far beyond basketball courts and business deals. This is a story about spiritual growth, the power of letting go of grudges, and discovering that true fulfillment comes not from what we achieve, but from who we become and how we serve others. If this conversation touches your soul the way it should, please hit that like button right now, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications because wisdom like this reminds us that the most important victories in life happen inside our hearts. Now, let's listen to this deeply personal and transformative discussion. The studio lights cast a warm glow across the intimate setting of Soul Conversations, a Sunday morning talk show that focused on faith, personal growth, and life's deeper meanings. Host Pastor Michael Johnson, a respected spiritual leader and author, sat across from Shaquille O'Neal in what was supposed to be a routine interview about Shaq's latest charitable endeavors. Shaq, we're here today to talk about your foundation work and community involvement, Pastor Johnson began, but I'd like to start with something more personal. In all your success, 4 NBA championships, business empire worth hundreds of millions, global fame, when did you first realize that maybe success meant something different than what you'd originally thought? Shaq shifted in his chair, the question clearly catching him off guard. He'd expected to discuss his latest restaurant openings or educational initiatives, not dive into the philosophical depths of his life journey. You know, Pastor Johnson, Shaq said after a long pause, that's a question I've been wrestling with for the past few years. But if I'm being honest, the moment everything changed for me was when my stepfather Philip, was dying. The studio fell quiet. This wasn't the usual light-hearted Shaq that audiences were accustomed to seeing on television. Philip Harrison was the man who raised me, who taught me discipline, who showed me what it meant to be a man. And there I was, sitting next to his hospital bed, realizing that all the championships, all the money, all the fame, none of it could give me one more day with the man who shaped who I am. Pastor Johnson leaned forward, sensing they were entering deeper waters than originally planned. What did that teach you? It taught me that I'd been measuring success all wrong, Shaq continued, his voice growing softer. I thought success was about accumulation, trophies, money, recognition. But sitting there with Philip, I realized that success is actually about connection. It's about the lives you touch, the love you give and receive, the peace you carry in your heart. That's a profound realization. How did it change you? Shaq was quiet for a moment, looking down at his hands. It made me start asking different questions. Instead of, how can I get more? I started asking, how can I give more? Instead of, how can I be more successful? I started asking, how can I be more useful to God and to other people? Pastor Johnson could sense they were just scratching the surface of something much deeper. Shaq, I know faith has become more important to you in recent years. Can you talk about that journey? Man, that's a big question, Shaq replied with a slight smile. I grew up going to church with my grandmother, but for most of my adult life, I treated faith like a backup plan. You know, God, if you help me win this game, I'll be good. God, if you help me make this business deal, I'll donate to charity. I was trying to negotiate with the creator of the universe. What changed that perspective? Honestly? Rock bottom, Shaq said, surprising both the host and the studio audience with his candor. Not financial rock bottom, I've been blessed beyond measure financially, but emotional and spiritual rock bottom. There was a period a few years ago when I felt completely empty, despite having everything the world says you're supposed to want. The vulnerability in Shaq's voice was striking. Here was one of the most dominant athletes in history, a man who had conquered every professional challenge he'd faced, admitting to spiritual emptiness at the height of his material success. I was successful by every external measure, but I was miserable inside. I was angry at people, holding grudges, focused only on myself and my own achievements. And one night, I just broke down and asked God, "What am I doing wrong? Why do I feel so empty when I have so much?" And what answer did you receive? The answer came slowly, over time. But essentially, God showed me that I was living backwards. I was trying to find my worth in what I could do instead of understanding my worth in who I am as His child. I was trying to earn love and approval instead of accepting that I was already loved unconditionally. Pastor Johnson nodded, recognizing the spiritual transformation that many people experience when they shift from performance-based worth to grace-based identity. But the real breakthrough, Shaq continued, came when I realized that my anger and grudges were poisoning my soul. I was carrying around resentment toward people who had hurt me, disappointment toward people who had let me down, and bitterness toward situations that hadn't gone my way. And all of that negative energy was blocking me from experiencing the peace and joy that God wanted me to have. If you're already feeling the depth of this conversation, please take a moment to hit that like button. What Shaq shares next about forgiveness will challenge how you think about letting go of hurt. Pastor Johnson leaned back in his chair, recognizing that they were about to explore one of the most challenging aspects of spiritual growth. Shaq, you mentioned holding grudges and resentment. Can you talk about specific situations where forgiveness became necessary for your own healing? Shaq took a deep breath, clearly preparing to venture into painful territory. There are several, but the biggest one involves my biological father, Joseph Tony. The mention of his biological father immediately shifted the energy in the room. Shaq had spoken publicly about his absent father before, but never in this context. For most of my life, I carried tremendous anger toward him. He wasn't there when I was growing up, and even when I became successful, his attempts to reconnect felt opportunistic. I felt like he wanted to be part of my success without having been part of my struggle. That's understandable anger, Pastor Johnson observed. It was understandable, but it was also destroying me, Shaq replied. I didn't realize how much mental and emotional energy I was spending on that anger until I started working with a spiritual counselor. She helped me understand that unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. How did you begin the process of forgiving him? It started with prayer, honestly. I spent months praying for the strength to forgive, not because he deserved it, but because I needed to be free from the anger. And slowly, God began to change my heart. Shaq paused, clearly emotional as he recounted the journey. The breakthrough came when I realized that my father was probably carrying his own pain, his own regrets, his own struggles that I couldn't see. Maybe his absence wasn't about not loving me. Maybe it was about his own brokenness, his own inability to be the father he knew I deserved. That's a mature perspective. How did that realization change things? It allowed me to separate his actions from his worth as a human being. I could acknowledge that what he did hurt me deeply, while also recognizing that he was a flawed person trying to navigate his own pain and limitations. Pastor Johnson nodded thoughtfully. And have you been able to have that conversation with him directly? Shaq's expression grew sad. He passed away before I fully worked through the forgiveness process. That's something I have to live with, that I never got to tell him I forgave him. Never got to have the conversation that might have brought healing to both of us. How do you carry that regret? I've learned to see it as a lesson rather than a burden. It taught me not to wait to forgive people. It taught me that forgiveness isn't about the other person being ready to receive it. It's about me being ready to give it. And it taught me that holding on to anger hurts me far more than it hurts the person I'm angry at. The studio was completely silent as Shaq shared this deeply personal aspect of his spiritual journey. But the biological father situation wasn't the only place I needed to learn forgiveness, Shaq continued. I had to forgive teammates who I felt had let me down, coaches who I thought had treated me unfairly, business partners who had betrayed my trust, even fans and media members who had criticized me. That's a lot of forgiveness work. It was, and it's ongoing. Forgiveness isn't a one-time event. It's a daily choice. Every day, I have to choose to release resentment, to assume good intentions when possible, and to focus on my own growth rather than other people's shortcomings. Pastor Johnson leaned forward. What does that daily choice look like practically? For me, it starts with prayer and meditation. Every morning, I spend time asking God to help me see people through His eyes, to give me compassion for their struggles, and to keep my heart soft toward them even when they hurt or disappoint me. And when someone hurts you now, how do you handle it differently? I try to respond instead of react. Reacting is emotional and immediate. It's based on hurt feelings and wounded pride. Responding is thoughtful and measured. It's based on my values and my understanding of what God wants from me. Shaq smiled slightly. Don't get me wrong, I'm not perfect at this. I still get angry. I still feel hurt when people treat me badly. But now I have tools to process those emotions in healthy ways instead of letting them turn into long-term resentment. Can you give an example of how this plays out in real life? Sure. A few years ago, someone I trusted in business made some decisions that cost me a lot of money and damaged some important relationships. The old me would have spent years being angry, plotting revenge, telling everyone who would listen how wrong this person was. And the new you? The new me felt the anger, acknowledged the hurt, and then asked myself, what can I learn from this? How can I use this experience to make better decisions in the future? How can I respond in a way that reflects my faith and values rather than just my wounded feelings? And were you able to forgive that person? Eventually, yes. It took time, and it required a lot of prayer and honest self-reflection. But I realized that my forgiveness wasn't about saying what they did was okay. It was about freeing myself from the burden of carrying anger toward them. Pastor Johnson paused, sensing the depth of transformation that Shaq was describing. It sounds like forgiveness has been central to your spiritual growth. Absolutely. I've learned that you can't have real peace, real joy, or real spiritual growth while carrying unforgiveness in your heart. It's like trying to run a race while carrying a 100-pound backpack. It's possible, but you'll never reach your potential until you're willing to put down the weight. Pastor Johnson shifted the conversation toward a topic that clearly lit up Shaq's entire demeanor. Shaq, you've talked about how your understanding of success has evolved. Can you walk us through what success means to you now, compared to what it meant during your playing career? Shaq's face brightened noticeably. Man, this is where faith has completely revolutionized my life. During my playing career, success was pretty simple to measure. Championships, individual awards, statistics, money, fame. It was all external validation. And that worked for you at the time? It worked until it didn't, Shaq replied with a laugh. I could win a championship and feel great for a few weeks, maybe a few months. But then what? I'd need another championship, another achievement, another validation to feel successful again. It was like an addiction. I needed bigger and bigger hits of external approval to feel satisfied. What changed that cycle? Faith taught me that my worth isn't based on my performance. God doesn't love me more when I score 40 points or less, when I miss free throws. His love is constant, unconditional, and not dependent on what I achieve. Pastor Johnson nodded. That's a fundamental shift in understanding identity. Exactly. Once I understood that my identity comes from being God's child rather than from being a basketball player or a businessman, everything changed. Success stopped being about proving my worth and started being about expressing my gratitude. Can you explain what you mean by expressing gratitude? Sure. When you understand that everything you have is a gift, your talents, your opportunities, your health, your family, then success becomes about using those gifts to serve others and honor God. It's not about accumulating more. It's about stewarding well what you've been given. Shaq leaned forward, his passion for this topic evident. I started asking different questions. Instead of, how can this opportunity benefit me? I started asking, how can this opportunity be used to help others? Instead of, how can I get more recognition? I started asking, how can I point attention toward causes and people that need support? That's a significant shift in motivation. How has it changed your business decisions? Completely. Transformed them. Every business venture I consider now has to pass a test. Does this create value for other people? Does it provide good jobs? Does it serve a community need? Does it align with my values and faith? Pastor Johnson was intrigued. Can you give a specific example? Absolutely. A few years ago, I was offered the opportunity to invest in a payday loan company. The financial returns would have been enormous. These companies make huge profits. But when I researched how they operate, I realized they primarily profit from people's desperation and financial illiteracy. So you passed on the opportunity? I did. The old me might have justified it by saying, business is business, or I'm not responsible for other people's financial decisions. But my faith teaches me that I am responsible for how I use my resources and influence. I can't take money from people who are struggling financially and call that success. What do you invest in instead? Things that build communities and create opportunities. Restaurants that provide good jobs and gathering places for families. Technology companies that solve real problems. Educational initiatives that give kids better chances at success. Real estate developments that revitalize neighborhoods rather than displacing existing communities. Pastor Johnson smiled. It sounds like you've become a very intentional investor. I have, and it's actually more profitable in the long run. When you invest in things that create real value, that solve real problems, that serve real needs, you tend to see sustainable returns rather than quick profits that disappear. But I imagine the greatest return isn't financial. You're absolutely right. The greatest return is the peace that comes from knowing that my work is aligned with my values. I sleep better at night knowing that my business decisions are helping people rather than hurting them. Shaq paused, gathering his thoughts. You know, Pastor Johnson, I used to measure success by how much I could accumulate. Now I measure it by how much I can contribute. I used to ask, what's in it for me? Now I ask, what's in it for others? That's a beautiful evolution. How has this change affected your relationships? It's transformed them completely. When your motivation shifts from getting to giving, people respond differently to you. They trust you more because they sense that you're not trying to use them for your own advantage. Can you elaborate on that? when I was focused primarily on my own success. My relationships were often transactional. I valued people based on what they could do for me, help me win games, make me money, increase my fame. But now I try to value people for who they are, not what they can do for me. And how has that changed your family relationships? Shaq's expression grew tender. It's made me a better father, that's for sure. Instead of just providing financially for my children, I'm more focused on being emotionally and spiritually present. Instead of just wanting them to be successful, I want them to be faithful, kind, and purposeful. What do you hope to pass on to your children about success? I want them to understand that success isn't about being better than other people. It's about being the best version of yourself. I want them to know that their worth comes from God's love, not from their achievements. And I want them to use whatever talents and opportunities they receive to make the world a little bit better. Pastor Johnson was clearly moved by the depth of Shaq's transformation. It sounds like faith has given you a completely new framework for evaluating your life. It has. Faith taught me that life is not about the size of your bank account, but about the size of your impact. It's not about how many people know your name, but about how many people you've helped. It's not about what you can get from the world, but about what you can give to it. Pastor Johnson shifted in his seat, clearly energized by the conversation's direction. Shaq, you've described a fundamental transformation in how you view success and relationships. I'm curious about the practical impact of this change. How has living with this new understanding of purpose affected the people around you? Shaq smiled broadly. That's probably the most exciting part of this whole journey. When you start living with intentional purpose, it creates this ripple effect that touches people in ways you never expected. Can you share some examples? Absolutely. Let me tell you about my restaurant employees. In the past, I viewed restaurants primarily as investments, how much revenue they generated, what the profit margins were, whether they increased my net worth. Now, I see them as communities where people earn livings, develop skills, and build careers. How has that changed how you operate them? Everything changed. We started offering education benefits for employees who want to finish high school or go to college. We created promotion tracks so people can advance from entry-level positions to management. We partnered with local schools to provide internships and job training programs. Pastor Johnson leaned forward with interest. What's been the result? Our employee retention is through the roof. Our customer service is better because people are invested in their work, and we've helped dozens of people change their economic trajectories. Just last month, one of our managers graduated from community college with a degree in business administration, something she never thought was possible when she started as a server 3 years ago. That must be incredibly fulfilling. More fulfilling than any basketball achievement I ever had, Shaq said without hesitation. When she walked across that graduation stage, I felt prouder than I did winning my first championship. Because this wasn't about me. This was about creating opportunities for someone else to succeed. You mentioned a ripple effect. How does this extend beyond your immediate business operations? It's amazing how purpose spreads. When employees see that their workplace cares about their development, they start caring more about their customers. When customers see authentic service from people who feel valued, they become more loyal and more likely to treat staff with respect. When communities see businesses investing in local development, they become more supportive and collaborative. Shaq paused, clearly passionate about this topic. But it goes even deeper than that. My children see how I approach business now, and it's teaching them to think about their own future careers differently. Instead of just asking, "What will make me the most money?" they're asking, "What will allow me to make a positive difference?" That's a powerful legacy to leave. That's the thing about living with faith-based purpose. It naturally creates legacy. When your focus shifts from accumulation to contribution, everything you build has the potential to outlast you and continue creating value for others. Pastor Johnson nodded thoughtfully. I imagine this transformation has also affected your charitable work. Completely revolutionized it. I used to approach charity like a tax write-off. Write a check, get the receipt, feel good about giving back. But now I see philanthropy as an extension of my faith and purpose. What does that look like practically? Instead of just donating money, I donate time and attention. I get involved in understanding the problems we're trying to solve, building relationships with the people we're trying to help, and creating sustainable solutions rather than just temporary relief. Can you give a specific example? Sure. We work with homeless shelters, but instead of just providing meals or beds, we focus on job training and placement. We partner with local businesses to create internship programs, provide interview clothing, and resume help, and offer ongoing mentorship as people transition back into stable housing and employment. What kind of results have you seen? Over the past 2 years, we've helped more than 200 people move from homelessness to stable employment and housing. But more importantly, many of them are now volunteering to help others make the same transition. It's created this beautiful cycle where people who have been helped become helpers themselves. Shaq's voice grew more animated as he continued. And here's what really amazes me. The business owners who participate in the job training program tell me it's made their companies stronger. They've found dedicated, grateful employees who bring a level of commitment you can't find anywhere else. So everyone benefits. Exactly. When you approach problems with faith and purpose, looking for solutions that serve everyone involved, you often find that what seemed like sacrifice actually becomes blessing. The businesses get great employees, the formerly homeless individuals get opportunities and dignity, and the community becomes stronger. Pastor Johnson was clearly impressed. It sounds like you've discovered that purpose-driven action creates more sustainable results than traditional charity. That's exactly right. When you help people develop skills and opportunities rather than just providing temporary relief, you're investing in their long-term success rather than creating dependency. And when you create systems that benefit everyone involved, those systems become self-sustaining. How has this approach affected your relationship with God? It's made prayer and faith much more practical and relevant to daily life. Instead of just asking God for blessings, I spend time asking how I can be a blessing to others. Instead of just seeking God's help with my problems, I ask how I can help solve problems that matter to God. And what do you sense matters to God? Justice, compassion, healing, restoration, opportunity, dignity, all the things that Jesus talked about when he was here. When I align my work and my resources with those priorities, I feel like I'm living in partnership with God, rather than just asking Him to bless my independent plans. Shaq paused, looking directly into the camera. And you know what? That partnership brings a kind of joy and fulfillment that no amount of personal success could ever provide. When you know that your life is being used for purposes bigger than yourself, every day becomes meaningful in a way that championships and business deals just can't match. As the interview moved into its final segment, Pastor Johnson leaned back and looked at Shaq with evident admiration. Shaq, listening to you describe this transformation, I'm struck by how fundamentally different your priorities are now compared to your playing days. If you could go back and talk to your younger self, what would you tell him? Shaq was quiet for a long moment, clearly considering the weight of the question. I would tell him that every gift you've been given, size, athletic ability, intelligence, Charisma comes with responsibility. God didn't give you those gifts just for your own benefit. He gave them to you because He has work for you to do that requires those specific talents. That's a profound way to view natural abilities. It changed everything for me when I realized that my size wasn't just good luck. It was a tool God wanted me to use for His purposes. My platform wasn't just about fame, it was about influence that could be used to help people. My business success wasn't just about wealth. It was about resources that could create opportunities for others. How do you think your younger self would have responded to that message? Honestly, he probably would have been resistant at first. When you're young and successful, it's easy to believe that you've earned everything through your own effort. It takes maturity, and usually some difficult experiences to recognize how much of our success depends on factors beyond our control. Our families, our communities, our opportunities, and yes, God's grace. Pastor Johnson nodded. What were those difficult experiences that opened your eyes? Injuries that reminded me my body wasn't indestructible. Business failures that taught me I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. Relationship struggles that showed me success without love is empty. And eventually, the death of people I loved, which forced me to confront the reality that nothing in this life is permanent except what we invest in eternity. Can you elaborate on that last point? Investing in eternity? Sure. Faith taught me to think beyond just this lifetime. Instead of asking, how can I be successful for the next decade? I started asking, what can I do that will matter 100 years from now? And what's your answer to that question? The only things that last are the impacts we have on people's lives. Every person I help develop skills. Every life I help redirect toward purpose. Every child I help believe in their potential. Those investments continue generating returns long after I'm gone. Shaq's voice grew more passionate. Think about it. A teacher affects students who become teachers themselves, creating an impact that multiplies for generations. A mentor shapes a young person who becomes a mentor to others. A business creates jobs that support families, which creates stability that allows children to pursue education and opportunities. So you're thinking in terms of generational impact. Exactly. I want my great-grandchildren to live in a world that's better because of choices I'm making today. And I want them to understand that they have the same responsibility to use their gifts and opportunities to serve others. Pastor Johnson smiled. That's a beautiful legacy to work toward. How do you maintain that perspective day to day? Daily spiritual disciplines are crucial. Prayer, meditation, reading scripture, spending time in nature. All of these help me remember that I'm part of something much bigger than my own life and goals. And practically, I try to make at least one decision every day based on eternal rather than temporal values. Maybe that's choosing to spend time with family instead of working late. Maybe it's choosing to invest in a project that serves people rather than one that just makes money. Maybe it's choosing to encourage someone instead of criticizing them. Those sound like small choices, but I imagine they add up. They absolutely do. Living with eternal perspective isn't about making one big heroic gesture. It's about making countless small choices that align with God's values rather than the world's values. Shaq leaned forward, speaking directly to the camera. I want anyone watching this to understand that you don't have to be famous or wealthy to live with purpose. Every person has gifts. Every person has influence. Every person has opportunities to make a positive difference in someone else's life. What would you say to someone who feels like their life is too ordinary to matter? I'd say that's a lie from the enemy. Jesus was a carpenter from a small town, but he changed the world. Mother Teresa worked with the poorest of the poor, but her influence continues decades after her death. Martin Luther King Jr. was just a preacher, but his dream continues to reshape society. What made them extraordinary? They understood that significance comes from faithfulness, not from fame. They were faithful to use whatever platform, whatever resources, whatever opportunities they had to serve God and serve others. Size of platform doesn't matter. Faithfulness to purpose does. Pastor Johnson was clearly moved. As we wrap up, what's your prayer for people who are watching this conversation? Shaq closed his eyes for a moment, then looked directly into the camera. My prayer is that everyone watching will experience the joy and peace that comes from living with purpose. I pray they'll discover that their lives matter, that their gifts are needed, and that God has good work prepared for them to do. I pray they'll understand that success isn't about comparing themselves to others, but about becoming the fullest expression of who God created them to be. And I pray they'll experience the incredible fulfillment that comes from using their lives to make other people's lives better. That's a beautiful prayer. Any final thoughts? Just this. If a big kid from Louisiana, who spent most of his early adult life focused on himself, can learn to live with purpose and faith, then anyone can. It's never too late to realign your life with what really matters. It's never too late to start living with eternal perspective. And it's never too late to discover that the most successful life is the one that serves others. As the cameras stopped rolling, Pastor Johnson reached over and shook Shaq's hand. Thank you for your transparency and wisdom. This conversation will impact more lives than you know. That's my hope, Shaq replied. And that's what I've learned success really means. Using your story, your platform, and your influence to help others discover their own purpose and potential. 6 months later, Soul Conversations received hundreds of letters from viewers whose lives had been changed by Shaq's message about faith, forgiveness, and purpose-driven success. Many had started their own community service projects. Others had changed career directions to align with their values, and some had simply begun viewing their daily work and relationships through the lens of eternal significance. The ripple effect continued to spread, proving Shaq's point that true success is measured not by what we achieve for ourselves, but by how we use our lives to serve something greater than ourselves. This profound conversation reminds us that true success comes not from accumulating achievements, but from aligning our lives with purpose and service to others. If this message inspired you to reconsider what success means in your own life, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more conversations about faith, purpose, and meaningful living, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their life has profound significance. Remember, you don't have to be famous or wealthy to live with purpose. You just have to be faithful to use whatever gifts and opportunities you have to serve others. Thank you for joining us on this deeply meaningful journey of discovery.